You want to know how to crush technical interviews like Google, Facebook, and Microsoft, which I did before, so let me tell you exactly how I did that. So you're probably watching this video because you want to know how to effectively prepare for your technical interviews for a software engineering position. And luckily for you, your resident tech trash software engineer, me, dohyunkim. I have interviewed at a lot of big tech companies in my time. Well, actually, I'm pretty young. I'm only like 24. But I have interviewed at a lot of big tech companies, and I have gotten offers at a lot of these companies as well. So, you know, you can say that like, I'm pretty valid, right? So with that in mind, I want to tell you how exactly I prepare for my coding interviews to maximize my success and get these job offers at these big tech companies. So for those of you that are new here, my name is dohyunkim, and I'm a software engineer up in the Bay Area, up in Silicon Valley, and I post content every single week talking about tech. So if you like that content and you want to see more of it, feel free to hit that subscribe button. If you want to support me, feel free to hit that like button on this video. Let's get into it. Unfortunately, the current state of software engineering interviews, which is these typical like data structure and algorithm problems, in my opinion, are not that strong indicators of how good of a software engineer you will actually be. It doesn't matter if you can reverse a linked list or invert a binary tree. Just because you can do that doesn't mean that you're going to be a great software engineer.
Oh, is that so?
It's this really weird thing where, in my opinion, there's a really big disconnect in terms of how we interview candidates and in terms of how people actually land those job offers and what they do on a day-to-day basis. But unfortunately, it is the name of the game and you got to know how to get it done.
We talking about practice.
So the number one resource that I want to recommend is Cracking the Coding Interview. Everyone talks about it. You've probably heard of it. It's this book right here. You've seen it many, many times before if you've been in the industry or in computer science at all. It's a very great introductory resource in terms of how coding interviews are conducted, and it also does a pretty good job at covering the basics in terms of what concepts you need to know to do well in these interviews, as well as providing you questions on these topics. For example, the way that this book is set up is that each chapter typically covers some type of data structure, whether that be a list or a graph or a tree, and then at the end of that chapter, there's a list of probably like 10 or 15 questions testing you on that topic. This is really useful, especially for beginners, because after you learn and read about a particular topic, everything is fresh in your mind and it gives a really organized way for you to test yourself to see how well you actually retain that knowledge. And also, all the solutions are available in the back of the book, so after you finish writing your solution, you can go back in the book and see, oh, how well did I do? Did my answer make sense? So while Cracking the Coding Interview is a very great resource, I want to reiterate that it is a beginner resource. And a lot of the questions, in my opinion, that are offered in this book are nowhere near as difficult as the real coding questions are at these really big name tech companies. But it is still a very good place to start because, quite frankly, the other platforms that are out there are a little bit too hard. So in my opinion, before you go out into any other resource or any other platform out there, you gotta go through every single page of Cracking the Coding Interview, do every single practice question in there, basically read it from cover to cover so that everything is completely filled out and you know that book like the back of your hand. But let's say you're not a big reading type of person and Cracking the Coding Interview is too much text for you and you'd rather watch videos because that's how you learn a little bit better. In that case, rather than doing Cracking the Coding Interview, I recommend that you check out AlgoExpert. If you've been on software engineering YouTube, you already know what this platform is. This is built by a resident YouTuber, Clement Mielescu, ex-Google, ex-Facebook, pen, potentially guy that gets no sleep at all and wakes up at like 2 p.m. in the afternoon. Great guy overall, super, super nice. And his platform is really great as well. I've personally gone through a few questions and gone over their learning modules as well, and I can personally vouch for the quality of the material. There's a dedicated section for you to watch videos where Clement and everyone else on the AlgoExpert team talks about the learning modules and talks about the concepts like the data structures and the algorithms necessary for you to solve these problems. And at the time of recording this video, which is April of 2021, there are at least like 150 practice questions for you to try out on your own after you go through all of the learning modules. And these questions are way more representative of what an actual software engineering interview is like. Like I mentioned, Cracking the Coding Interview, the questions are good, but they are way easier than what the actual industry questions are asked. Whereas with AlgoExpert, the questions are much more accurate and the difficulty is much more similar to what is actually asked day to day right now. Also, just another quick plug in the video, but if you're watching this video, there's a very high chance that you're deep in the job recruiting process and you really want to land your dream job at your dream company. And I so happen to offer career consulting as well as resume reviews at buymeacoff.ee/dohyunkim, where you can book some time on my calendar and we can talk one-on-one to talk about your career dreams and how you can best achieve them. And I'll also be able to go over your resume to make sure that you have an awesome resume to make sure that you get accepted into as many companies as you possibly can. I know how hard it is going through the job recruiting process because I've been through it myself, and that's why I wanted to start this career consulting business to help you out and help clarify the process and make it a little bit easier for you to land your dream job wherever you want to go. Once again, if you're interested in any type of career consulting or resume reviews, check it out at buymeacoff.ee/dohyunkim. Alright, so let's say you just finished Cracking the Coding Interview and you did every single question on there, or you just went through all of AlgoExpert and you finished every single question on there as well. Great job, that's a lot of questions, that's a lot of work. But the work has just begun. There is much, much more to do. The next resource that I really recommend is LeetCode. If you've been living under a rock and you don't know what LeetCode is, basically LeetCode is this interview prepping platform for the software engineering industry. It is basically a giant question bank of user submitted questions, of thousands and thousands of questions asked by actual interviews at actual companies. So these questions are much harder than anything Cracking the Coding interview offers, and harder than stuff that AlgoExpert offers as well. Because quite frankly, these questions are actual companies that real software companies are actually asking you in the interview. And the way that I personally use LeetCode is to have an interview partner to go through it with. And here's why. I think there are a lot of people that like to treat interview prepping as a sprint where they go through like 10 hours of LeetCode every single day, but in my opinion, that's so not sustainable. So rather than doing that, what I would personally recommend to do is that every single day, you do maybe 1 or 2 questions a day. And then you have someone that you can interview prep with, like a partner, and also every single day, or maybe like 3 to 4 times a week, you go on a video call with each other and you do a mock interview where you give them the question that you did that day and they give you the question that they did that day. The reason why this is a really effective interview prepping strategy is the fact that in real life interviews, you will always have a real person interviewing you. And in real life interviews, they will be able to give you hints, kind of guide you along the right path to make sure that you're making the right decision, to make sure that you're implementing a somewhat correct solution. Whereas when you're just prepping with LeetCode completely by yourself, you have no feedback at all. And that is just not what a realistic interview is like. So that's why I really recommend that you have a partner that you go through this interview prepping process with, because it provides a much more realistic and lifelike practice scenario with a real human interviewer. And what's really great about LeetCode, especially if you purchase the premium option, is the fact that you can filter the questions in terms of what company actually asked those questions as well. So let's say that your dream job is at Facebook. Then you can click the Facebook tab and you can see all the interview questions that have been asked by Facebook and practice solely on that. So those are the resources that I recommend that you use and the order of how to use them. But here are a few things that I recommend that you keep in mind as you go through this interview process. Number one is the fact that interview prepping is a skill that you learn, and oftentimes for a lot of people, and especially for me at least, it is not something that comes naturally. It's very different from what actual software engineering actually is. Trust me, I can't really tell you the last time I had to invert a binary tree at my work. It just doesn't happen.
Hold up.
So with that in mind, that's why practicing interview prep questions are so important, because it's just so different from what we are used to in our day-to-day jobs as a software engineer that it's a completely separate skill that you have to learn on top of being an actual software engineer. I can reassure you that even though I'm currently a software engineer at a big tech company up in Silicon Valley, every single time I go back into the interview prepping process after taking a few months off, it is a really long process for me to get back up to speed. Because quite frankly, it's a part of your brain that you haven't used, and it's a completely separate skill set from what you actually do as a software engineer. So even the easy questions on LeetCode, even the easy questions on AlgoExpert, they're pretty hard for me, because quite frankly, it's not something that I'm used to doing on a day-to-day basis. So it takes time to really ramp up. And the very few questions are always going to be hard, but don't get too discouraged if you don't get the answers right away. So remember to respect the process, and to remember also that interview prepping and interview questions are a completely different skill set from your actual day-to-day job as a software engineer. All right, so my second tip is to always set a time limit in terms of how long you spend on every single question. In a real life interview, you're going to get like 45 minutes for one question, or maybe 2 questions, where the second question is a follow-up question from the very first one with like an added constraint or something. So with that in mind, there's no reason that you should be spending an hour and a half, 2 hours on every single problem. Now, don't get me wrong, I do this all the time. I get super frustrated and super laser focused on a question where I'm like, I have to solve this question. Like I refuse to do anything else until I solve this question. But that is not an efficient use of your time. So every single time you start a question, I would say start a timer to set max at like 30 minutes or 40 minutes max. And then after that 30 to 40 minute time limit, that's when you have to start looking at the solution and see, all right, what did I miss? Like, why could I not answer this question correctly? It's going to be a way more efficient use of your time to restrain yourself to 30 or 40 minutes. And it's also going to be more realistic in terms of what the actual interviews are like. So remember, set a hard limit in terms of how long you spend on every single question. And if you don't get it, go straight to the solution and see what did you get wrong and how come you couldn't solve it. All right, the third tip that I'd recommend is for every single question. It doesn't matter if you got the question right or if you got the question wrong. Always look at other people's implementations of the solutions. And I think it's really helpful to see these other implementations to see like, oh, that's a cool trick. I didn't know that you could do that. Because even if you got that question right, oftentimes there's like this new like coding trick in a certain language or this new data structure or implementation that you may have never thought of that you can store in your brain for knowledge, and then you can use it for future questions down the line. This happens all the time for me, and I really think that regardless if you get the question right or wrong, looking at other alternative solutions, I would say at least 2 to 3 different solutions is going to be so essential for you to really develop and grow your skills for these interview questions. All right, so the fourth tip, I think it's the fourth, maybe it's the third, I forget, I'll fix it in post-editing right now. But my fourth tip is that for every single question that you do, regardless if you get it right or wrong, write down what core concept was tested in that question. For example, if this is a graph question, what was the core algorithm? What extra constraint was added to it that made it different from other ones? Or maybe it's a question that asks you to return the results in a particular order. Was it more efficient to use a sorting algorithm or something like a priority queue? After every single question that you do, I think it's super important to write a brief summary about it, and remember to really boil it down to the very key concept of what was this question really testing me on? How come I got it right? What did I do well? What did I do not so well? What could I have done better in future questions that are similar to this? A professor during college always told me that you learn during reflection, and really it is by writing these small, like 3 to 4 sentence blurbs and summaries of every single question that I really think the majority of learning happens, because it forces you to think about the question and to know what you did well, what you did wrong, and what you can do better for future questions moving forward, because you're really reflecting on, all right, what exactly is this question trying to ask me? So I highly recommend that for every single question that you do, regardless of whether you get it right or wrong, always write a brief summary about it, because reflection is when you really learn. All right, so the fifth and final piece of advice that I have in terms of the interview prepping grind is to respect the process. It is a marathon, not a sprint. I really do not recommend spending like 10 to 12 hours every single day trying to prep, because really that'll take a toll on your mental and physical health. Do it slowly. Do a few questions every single day. Find a partner to interview with and trade those questions a few times a week. Make sure that you are taking care of yourself, because when you are in a better mental and physical health, that is going to be when your brain is going to be performing at the very highest levels. You don't want to put any type of unnecessary stress on yourself. So remember, take it slow, respect the process, do a little bit of questions every single day, and you will have great success in the future in terms of interview questions. All right, well, that about does it for today's video, and I hope that you enjoyed the content. And if you found it useful or informative, I would really appreciate it if you hit that like button. It helps spread my video out to other people, and it helps me as a small channel grow. And if you want to see more of my content, feel free to hit that subscribe button as well. Once again, thanks so much for watching today's video, and I'll see you in the next one.